my real unofficial social networks, because I tend to be more active on Twitter than anything else. Next slide. My unofficial parts. Next slide. My social bookmarks. Next slide. My photos. Next slide. My videos. Next slide. My reading list. Next slide. My debt-free reading list. Next. My music. Next. So this is me, and I do a lot of those other things, including starting internet memes. I write some columns and so on. But strangely enough, I also have, despite all of that, I still have a job. And that job just does involve thinking about things like collaboration, knowledge management, and so on. So, but what I want to speak to you about is what I've learned about creativity. And I do a couple of things. I mean, I play a bunch of musical instruments. I write some columns. I start some newsletters. I have a reasonably well-read bunch of blogs and so on. So I want to speak to you purely from personal experience, not about any general thing, right? So, but that's the best thing about this. Most people who write these big self-help books about how to be successful in your life basically turn personal anecdotes into general rules. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So next slide. I'm not going to tell you things that your teachers are entirely going to agree with. So that's the first warning. So next slide. Or your parents for that matter. So next slide. Especially your parents. So next slide again. But it's important to listen to them. Next slide. Just not all the time. So I think what I want to get to is what are these 5 things that I've done, right? So they will seem slightly non-intuitive, but I'm going to explain all of them in a little bit of detail. Yeah, next slide. You can't be creative if you're serious about this. So I think this is something that I've learned in the last 5 or 6 years. Is that humor is a very, very integral part of creativity. You can't be creative without necessarily understanding what it is to be funny. And funny is not about laughing at others, but funny is essentially about accepting the fact that others can laugh at you. That's probably one of the biggest things that I've ever learned. What is interesting about humor is that when you write or when you come up with good humor, the process of coming up with good humor is extremely enriching. It's extremely refreshing for your mind. And that's why it's important. Next slide, please. So this is a project that I started about a year back, I think. It's called Tamgram Page. And this was centered around all those small little interesting funny incidents that happen to people. Not necessarily just Tamgrams, but pretty much everyone really. It's become more of a generic thing. And what is interesting is I want to share a small little anecdote about Tamgram Page. Every one of the cartoon strips that we draw on this is something that my mother looks at and says, okay, so this is funny, this is genuinely funny, or no, this is deliberately hurtful. This is, you guys are laughing at us. It's not a good thing. You're laughing at the older generation and so on. So actually, every one of those strips is actually looked at by this 50-year-old person who looks at it and says, yes, this is genuinely funny. So in a sense, it is easy to laugh at someone. It's much harder to understand humor at a very basic level. Next slide. The other thing about humor is the fact that it tends to span across sort of multiple. So so this is Siri and everybody knows it's Apple and all of that. But the fact that it's associated with the central government joke from the past is the sort of thing that you might think is trivial, right? But the whole idea of coming up with something like that is not something that you come up with by yourself. It's because you are connected with several other people on Twitter and things like that. You get some of these ideas. Next slide. The second lesson I want to speak to you about is that we should never do the same thing for long periods of time. You'll often be given advice to focus and to read the same thing. Focus on this task till you completely get it done with. Nothing is anti-creativity than doing the same thing for long periods of time. Right? So, next slide. That this has always been the traditional view that you will lock yourself into a room and meditate, come up with world-changing ideas. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work. Next slide. So, this is not to make fun of this, but we are in an era, right, for better or worse. In the past, right, when people left their homes and went away, it would often be years before they got news of something that happened at home. Because news would travel only at the speed of the fastest thoughts. Right? But we've changed now. We are now, for better or worse, in an era of instant information. You know what's happening on the other end of the world instantaneously. In fact, the news of an earthquake in Washington reached another city faster than Twitter, than the actual seismic waves itself. Right? So this is the sort of era we're living in. So which means that you really need to think about, is it really attention deficit disorder or continuous partial attention? Right? We live in an era where you need to be able to do continuous partial attention, which is not to say that you will look at 10 different things at the same time, but be able to slice your day into small little chunks where you're very productive on what it is that you're doing right now. My most productive team members are people who code for about an hour and then get on Twitter for about 10 minutes, check Facebook, watch videos, chat with 10 people, and then get back to coding again. So it is just that it's important to recognize that for some people that is a very productive way of working. And it actually because of the fact that you're engaging different parts of the brain, I mean it is sometimes does help creativity. Yeah, next slide. I want to sort of give you a little bit of background in the context of this, right? So all of you have read the Mahabharata, and many of you may not have wondered why there were 5 Pandavas and not, say, 7. 7 is a nice number, or 3. Why were there 5 Pandavas? And there's a reason, because the 4 of the Pandavas actually represent different unique characteristics that people tend to have. And then there's the 5th one, right? So on the one hand, there's the person who is at peace with the world. In the sense that I'm calm, I know I'm doing the right thing, I'm at peace with the world. So that's the Yudhishthira. The second hand, there are times when you must be angry at people. There are times when you must go in a fight. You must be the rebel. You must say that there's something wrong here. So that's the Bhima character. He's always angry, right? There are times when you must say that you are, I don't know, anything. I must learn. I must go to Khan Academy, or I must, view these YouTube videos or read these books. Because to be the student, the phase that all of you are going through right now, the student where you consciously say, I don't know, I must learn, right? So that's the Nakula, right? And the last one, the least understood, is the introspective, depressed one, which is Sahadeva, which is that there are times when you must lock yourself and introspect about what it is you're doing, instead of being constantly in the world, right? The reason Arjuna is also the third and the middle is the fact that he embodies all these characteristics when needed. So this is not about multitasking as it is about being multidimensional. It's about being all those different characteristics when the need arises. It's not just about just doing the right thing or just being angry all the time or just introspecting or just learning all the time. You need to do all of that. So that's this notion about the Mahabharata example. Next slide, please. Oh, I didn't notice it. About being the basic person is to fall in love. Personally, again, this is only personal experiences, right? Is that I have never been more creative than at the time when I was quoting the girl I eventually married. I've written short stories, I've tried creative ways to get out early at work, and I've made music, and I have made these creative gifts, and done everything that is necessary to keep my mind refreshed every single day, because so I had to impress that person, right? So, but the bigger lesson here is the fact that it's not just about romance, it's not just about relationships or or the person you meet in your life. When I learn a musical instrument, and I play some, I play the violin, guitar, and cello. When I learn a new musical instrument, I see it as this person that I must impress and make that person fall in love with. So it's just about treating every one of those things as if it's a programming problem, actually fall in love with that programming problem and make it sort of make it like you and get it solved and so on. It's just that it's a general approach that you get insanely passionate. And if you don't do that time slicing, you can't do this. You can't be insanely passionate about a programming problem for 20 hours or 30 hours. It must be in short bursts. So that's the thing about falling in love. So the next slide. Play video and vote. Again, something your parents will not tell you. Again, it's not something your teachers are going to tell you. But leaving aside addiction, leaving aside the fact that you are actually doing that when you're supposed to be doing something, leave aside all. There's a great amount, there's a great amount of things to be learned from playing games that enrich your mind, and this includes, not just board games. And I'm sure people agree with chess and things like that. But video games are quite important. I mean, in today's world, they're quite important. You'd be interested to know that 2009 was the first year that Hollywood box office revenue fell below the revenues of the gaming industry. So it's an interesting shift. We are all evolutionarily wired to be competent. We're all evolutionarily wired to compete with each other, right? And games do exactly that. They challenge your mind, and they have to make you collaborative in many cases if it's massively multiplayer. So this is not something, again, in the sense that you should not be doing this when you're doing something else, but it's important. It's an important aspect. When people tell you games are bad for you, you must disagree with it, right? So that's the fourth. And the last one, next slide, please. Copy from others, but add value and then give credit. Right? So we'll give you a bit of background. There's no such thing as an original idea. As much as people will tell you, there's no such thing as an original idea. Every idea is something that has been built upon somebody else's building blocks. Sometimes we unconsciously do it. So there's no such thing as, you don't lock yourself into a room and ideas just spring from the empty, depths of your mind. It doesn't work like that. It works when you're in a network. It works when you're collaborating with people and ideas bounce off each other. And we do it unconsciously sometimes. Unfortunately, our view of how intellectual property works sometimes distorts our idea of how ideas actually work. The fact that we now have ownership of ideas and a patent is a way by which we can actually monetize an idea. It sometimes clouds the fact that ideas are not necessarily original. They are derivative. They are built on other people's ideas. And so it's important for us to recognize that. Right? So there is no conflict between copying from others, being inspired by it, building on it, and at the same time, there are negative issues such as plagiarism and so on. So that's because I clearly said you have to add value. Right? Just copying someone and not giving credit, that's plagiarism. But you've got to understand that the greatest ideas come when you see other people's ideas. That's as simple as that. Right? So why do we have a TEDx? So that I can share my ideas. That's the whole idea. And when I started my first band, this was a tagline. It was copy left and right, all rights are reversed. So this was the tagline we had. Say that people are free to copy this music and build on top of it. So my last slide, next slide. Now, perhaps we have to call it not creativity. The problem with creativity is that you're creating. Right? Maybe we have to call it now creativity. The sense that the ability to take something that's others and then build on it and then do something interesting with it. We call it creativity. So those are my 5 lessons. Thank you.